All right, good afternoon to all of you who just joined or are joining. It is now 2 minutes past 4 here in Central European time. So welcome to everybody to this webinar on an update on AML. So I'm here with my colleagues, Cristina Lumbreras and Freddie McBride to provide this update. Before we start, there's two things I would like to tell you. So first of all, just note that this webinar is being recorded and the recording of the webinar will be shared online. Yes, on our website on eena.org/AML. So after a few days after the webinar, you will be able to listen and watch again to this webinar. And another thing I'd like to inform you about is the possibility to ask questions. So you have a box, you should see a tool somewhere, I think below the slides, you should see something like questions and answers. So you can type your question and we'll be reading it during the presentation. So we're here to give you an update on advanced mobile location. So just to give you a few words. So first of all, I'll introduce again my colleagues, Cristina Lumbreras, Technical Director of EENA. Welcome, Cristina. And Freddie McBride, who is Director of Digital Communications Policy and Regulation. Thank you, Freddie, for joining and welcome. And myself, I'm Benoît Vivier. I'm Public Affairs Director at EENA. All right, so just a few words about AML. If you joined this webinar, I believe you know what AML is. So it's technology used to provide handset-based location to emergency call takers during an emergency communication. So this is very generally how it works. Of course, it can be improved, but basically when someone contacts the emergency services, your phone will detect that there's an emergency communication being made, will start looking for your position and then transmit this position to the emergency services via SMS or HTTPS. We'll go through that later. I'm aware that a PSAP really does not look like what you see on the slides, but you just have to imagine. So yeah, this is very broadly, very quickly what AML is. Of course, you'll find more information about the technology on our website, eena.org/AML, and also by just listening to this webinar. Just to add also a few additional information that AML is already in the EU legislation. There's a few points in the legislation that are related to AML. So first of all, the main point is in the European Electronic Communications Code, which was adopted in 2018 and requires basically all the emergency communications to be located. And emergency communications means emergency calls, but not only, it also means the SMS, for instance, that can be used especially by people with disabilities, but also by other end users to contact the emergency services. These should also be located. And as you can see here in the legislation, this location, first of all, should be transmitted free of charge. And it should include both the network-based location information and the handset-derived caller location information, which is what AML is about. There's also some provisions related to handset-derived location information in the roaming regulation, which was adopted last year in 2022. Basically, MNOs should, so mobile network operators in Europe should cooperate together to make sure that the transmission of the AML information is free of charge and that is actually transmitted. And that includes, of course, the handset-derived location information. So that's an important provision which is in the roaming regulation. And finally, just want to make one last point about the recent delegated regulation supplementing the European Electronic Communications Code, which asks the national authorities to lay down criteria on the accuracy and the reliability of caller location information. So that includes the different types of location. So the networks, but also the handset-derived location information. So I know many national regulatory authorities are busy laying down these criteria, and the criteria should basically look like X% of emergency communications should come with a location within X meters. So this is a bit what it will look like. And we will be speaking again about that a bit later today with my colleague, Freddie. So AML is in the EU legislation, but it's also in the standards. There are standardization work happening at ETSI, the European Telecommunications Standard Institute. And I'll give the floor to my colleague, Christina, to go through that.
Thank you, Benoit. Here, my goal is really to let you know that this document exists. So I think there are many people who are not aware about this document. So it's a technical specification that has been published and developed by ETSI, concretely by the Emergency Communications Technical Committee, EMTEL. And I have added the link here. So the full name is TS103625. And the last version was published in March of this year. So if you can go to the next slide, Benoit. So here is the table of content, not all of it, but I just wanted to highlight some of the points so that you can see that there are both types of transport are covered. So we have the part of SMS. Here in the 6.3, we have also the part covering HTTPS, so 6.4. And this way, it's also explain how the SMS is transported to the different formats. We have also the part on security, and we have also some solutions for the challenge of roaming. And we have also on the part of HTTPS, there are also some general explanations. Also, the security has been covered. And we have some examples, and of course, the limitations of HTTPS. I have jumped directly to section number 6, but no, you can go please to section number 5, because there it's a more generic section on the handset functionalities, but there are some challenges that are still to be solved, like the availability of the MSSDN, that is especially important for the matching of the HTTPS message and the voice. We also explain the positioning methods and the time that is needed, and something that it's crucial is the battery life. And now we can go to the next slide, Benoit. Thank you. And here we have the last sections of the document, the mobile network capabilities. So this is also a challenge that was faced at the starting implementation, when the implementation of AML started, to see that the SMS and the HTTPS message could be sent at the same time as a voice communication was being done. There are also some operational guidances for the PSAPs, and we slightly speak about next generation 112, more making the reference to another document where we have more details on this architecture. And in the annexes, sometimes in the standards, there are the most important parts. You can see the SMS format with the mandatory and not mandatory fields, as well as in the HTTPS message format, the optional and the mandatory fields. And then these both are the normative annexes, and one informative one that is more about the management of location best practices by the PSAPs. And that's it on my side, Benoit.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you for delivering this update. It's a very interesting document, and I invite everyone to have a look at it. You added a link to the slides, Christina, and since the slides are going to be shared after that webinar, you can easily retrieve it. You can also, actually everything we presented about AML, also the legislation, you can find all the information you need on eena.org/AML. And I think this standard is very comprehensive and encompasses a lot of different aspects of AML. So I think it's really important very interesting to have a look at it. All right, so we'll continue. I will reappear on the screen. Yeah. So yeah, today we're here to present to you our latest document on AML. It's the AML Report Card, which is quite a long document. It's a bit more than 300 pages. So we're here also to show you the highlights of it. But in this document, we really intend to show country per country how AML is rolled out, because there's many different parameters to include when implementing AML, and Christina, you touched upon that in your presentation. So we'd like to show really each country per country how this is done. We cover only the European countries, which is already more than 30 countries, so it's actually quite comprehensive already. So here we aim in this webinar today to really present it from like a more global perspective. We won't go into the situation like country per country, but really showing more the trends and how this is used generally in Europe. All right, so just to show you a bit where we are, first of all, on AML. So AML is now being used in most countries in Europe. As I said, it's a bit more than 30, if I remember correctly. So yeah, this map is getting fuller and fuller. I remember when it was only a few countries, a few dots on the maps. Now it's quite good to see that. So here is the availability on Android smartphones. And you see that there's slightly less for iOS, so Apple smartphones. But in general, it's quite good. And the countries that you see in gray on this map, I know that many of these countries are working on the implementation. So hopefully next year we'll see more orange also on this map. So it is progressing. In addition, we saw when we collected feedback from the AML report card, we saw that a few countries have reported that they use AML provided by Harmony OS, which is the Huawei smartphones. So the 5 countries you see on this map, there are not so many I can mention them. It's Finland, Netherlands, Switzerland, Slovakia, and Romania. They have reported to receive AML provided by Huawei smartphones. So I think it's also some interesting developments. There's actually another legislation which I haven't mentioned earlier, but it's also quite important, is that any smartphone manufacturer basically that want to sell their devices in the European single market now, they have to integrate AML in the smartphone. So which is why also the newcomers in the market will also need to integrate AML, and they will have to integrate also to use the standard which Christina has just presented. All right, so what I can show you. So this is the activation of AML, but we know that it's not only the activation that matters, but more the practical use by the emergency services. So we can see here that in most of the countries that were in orange on the map, AML is used by all the emergency services. There's a few exemptions. In France, Germany, Slovenia, it's not used by the police. In Croatia, perhaps it has changed since then, but until some time it was not used by the emergency medical services and the fire and rescue services. But in general, all the other countries are using for all the emergency services, and I think that's very important. We saw that other countries actually have mentioned the use by other forces, so it can be the Coast Guards or like sea rescue services, whatever it's called in the countries, the mountain rescue, the gas emergencies, the road assistance. And actually for all these service, getting the location of the colors is also very important. So we can see that it's really widely used by different emergency services. I'll just go back to the slides before. Actually, we can see that. So here what you see on the right side of the tables is the number for which AML is activated. And we can see that in most countries, it works also with national emergency numbers. And some countries have even included 911, for instance. We know that in some cases, 911 can redirect to 112. So then AML is also activated for 911. For instance, I see here Iceland, but there's a few other countries like Slovenia here. So really, it's something that is quite well used now by emergency services. I'll continue we're showing the maps, and here, now we'll look at the transmission methods of AML. So Christina, in your presentation, you mentioned that AML can be transmitted by SMS or by HTTPS. In general, all European countries are using SMS to transmit the AML positions. It's considered as more robust. So yeah, that's why it is used mostly. But and we see that it's split between short number and long number. It doesn't make such a difference actually. So some use 112 to route the SMS. Some use a full long number. So once again, it doesn't make such a big difference. But what is quite interesting is that some countries are also using HTTPS as a complement to SMS. So in no country is HTTPS used as the unique way to route the AML positions, but in some places it's used as a complement. And it's used as a complement for different reasons. So one is to improve the success rate of AML. We saw that in some countries, you receive some positions by HTTPS, which you wouldn't receive by SMS. Sometimes it's the reverse, but just using different transmission method can really help to improve that success rate. We also see that now it's possible to include additional information in the HTTPS message. So not only the location, but also we can have, the vertical location, which is also some location, but also the language of the device, for instance, which is something that can be useful for the call taker. So this can be provided in the HTTPS, not necessarily in the SMS, because there's a size constraint in the SMS. So yeah, this is something that is possible and that will grow exponentially. Here today is the device language, but in the future there might be even more information, and that will be transmitted by HTTPS. I think it's good to have a look at the ETSI standard because it also shows you what is possible to include in the HTTPS fields. And finally, HTTPS is also used in a few countries to allow AML for roaming, though we know that it's not a perfect solution because people roaming in another EU member state, they don't always have the mobile data activated. At least some of us Europeans do now, but it's not the case for everyone, and it's not so widely done. So that can, of course, limit the success rates of HTTPS, especially when roaming. But at least if it can help with a few positions, it's already helpful. As I said, it can be used as a complement, and I think it's quite good to use both. Just one final point here is that you can basically match the SMS and the HTTPS received. So you can, when there's an AML, when there's an emergency communication which is made, there can be one SMS sent and one HTTPS sent. You can match the two using the email field, which will in all cases be similar. So then you can really use in complement the information provided by the two transmission methods. We had a webinar actually about that, so I included a link if you want to watch again this webinar, so that when you open these slides again, you can click on the link and access this webinar. I think it was very interesting. Next is about AML for roaming. I just mentioned that it's something that is quite a hot topic, I would say. Of course, we all know the constraints with SMS that technically it's a bit hard to route an SMS when roaming, because by default they go back to their own country. But there are a few solutions to make it possible to have AML for roaming. Here I speak only about Android phones, not about Apple phones, because for the moment, it's only on Android phones that AML is available when roaming. Yeah, where was I? Yes. So I just mentioned HTTPS, which can be a solution, not ideal though. There's another solution which has been developed by engineers by Orange Belgium, so one mobile network operator in Belgium, which basically consists, I'll make it very short because I'm not a technician, to include the country codes and then route the to include a country code before the short code to which AML will be routed, so that the SMS will stay in the country and can be routed to the right SMSC in the country. So that is a solution which you can find in the ETSI standards. You can also find in some GSMA documents, and we also organized a webinar about it. So It is something that works in a few countries. I can already show you now that it works in 6 countries. So Ireland, Belgium, Finland, Estonia, Romania, and Greece. I hope it will be working in an increasingly high number of countries. But for anything, I can really insist on the importance of this technology. Just want to go back to this slide. It has already saved lives, that's functionality. So some of you were at the 112 award ceremony this year in Ljubljana a few weeks ago. There was a story in Romania, basically, where there was a Ukrainian migrant who had crossed the border and was caught in the cold and was a bit lost in the Romanian mountains at the border. He called 112 in Romania, and he couldn't describe where he was. Of course, he wasn't familiar with the area. And thanks to that solution by AML for roaming, that person could be found and could be saved and is now safe. So really, that was a really moving story, which we heard about during the 112 award ceremony. And I think this shows that this technology can work. So it's important to work on this in your countries. Yeah, just so on a very different topic, it's a similar map, but it's quite different things. I mentioned a bit earlier when I spoke about the EU legislation that AML is also mandatory for other types of communications to 112. So not only the voice calls, but also, for instance, the SMS that are sent to emergency services. Here, for convenience, I call that SMS to 112, but it can be 113 or 114 or any other number. Of course, it depends. But basically, here AML should also work, and it works for Google and for Apple. So it's important to activate it. And we see that there's not so many countries on this map, or not as many as I wanted to. So it shows that still in something like half of European or EU countries, it is possible to send an AML position for people who text 112. So basically, they will send a text to 112, and then the phone will do exactly the same process as a voice call. So it will combine the position and then send another SMS to the emergency services to send the position of the person contacting the emergency services. All right, so now we've seen a few features. I think it's quite important now to have a look also at how well AML functions. And for that, I will give the floor to my colleague, Freddie McBride.
Okay, thank you, Benoit. So as Benoit mentioned, we published the AML report card for 2023 quite recently. And in order to populate that report, we carried out a survey of emergency services organizations in many countries. And this year, for a couple of reasons, we asked for more detailed facts and figures or statistics on the nature of the location that the PSAPs were receiving. We had 17 detailed responses to question 5.1. I'd like to extend our appreciation to those organizations that responded, because this is really useful information. On the one hand, it tells us about not just the wide implementation of AML, but also how successful it is. And it's also useful for us in terms of using this data to inform our recommendation for caller location information, which I'll talk a little bit about in a couple of slides' time. So we'll look at some of these facts, and we just did a quick analysis of them. It's not to have a league table of countries, but I think it demonstrates to you that you may see higher success rates in some countries, and to understand how they have higher success rates, there are certain things that need to be done, and if they're implemented, then we can really maximize the benefits that AML can bring. So Benoit, if you could just go to the next slide, please. So first of all, we asked the PSAPs responding about network location for mobile originated emergency communications, and of all the emergency communications received that originated on mobile networks, 82 to 100% of them had location information provided by the network. Now, strictly speaking, from a legal sense, that should be 100%, and indeed, at least cell ID is always available. what may be the issue here in terms of the lower end of that scale could be that the calls are in limited service state. This is where you have like just emergency calls only sign on your phone, or if it's made from a SIMless call. And for some reason, the way the PSAP is implemented, getting access to that information, like pulling it from a database or something, is not implemented for those calls. And that's something that should be looked at and addressed. The second interesting fact here is the range for accuracy from location information from the networks, and it ranges from 300 meters to 25 kilometers based on what was reported from those 17 organizations. So in terms of the range and accuracy, cell ID is kind of the, if you like, the default or common denominator in terms of what's provided by the network. Some countries have implemented more advanced solutions based on radio measurement techniques, and that's why you would see more accurate location coming from the countries that have implemented these solutions. Other factors that impact on you know, the accuracy of network location can relate to the topology of the network itself. So, for example, in urban areas, you tend to have smaller cell sizes and more dense networks, so more cells. And when you have that, you tend to get, even just with cell ID, you get more accurate location. And in urban areas, you tend to have less dense networks and a greater cell coverage. And therefore, that would explain why we see location accuracy as high as 25 kilometers, which of course, if we reflect on the legislation, is not really useful enough to come to the callers, you know, to effectively intervene. I just mentioned here the potential for 5G networks for accurate location, because with 5G, the networks become even more dense and the cell sizes become smaller because they're using higher radio frequencies. So there's great potential in 5G for providing more accurate location. Now that is a ways off at the moment, because you know, at the moment 5G has really just been used for data, and even as we migrate from 2G and 3G to 4G, the voice will stay on 4G for quite a while to come. But we will be doing something on 5G network location in terms of a webinar at some point in the future, perhaps early next year, and we'll tell you more about that then. Next slide, please, Benoit. So just moving to AML itself. So what we've seen from the 17 responding organizations to question 5.1 is that handset location, or AML, is received for 30 to 97% of mobile originated emergency communications. Now, there are some factors that impact this AML success rate. So firstly, is roaming support implemented in the country? And if it is, you tend to have better success rate, of course. The other is, of course, you need to have a smartphone for AML to work. So in countries where the smartphone penetration is higher, you tend to have a higher success rate. The number of limited service state calls is kept to a minimum if possible. This is something that I think requires a little bit more attention in terms of analyzing why we tend to get quite a number of these. My own view on that is emergency calls at the moment, even if a subscriber has a VoLTE service, so 4G voice service, when they dial 112, it drops back, circuit switch fallback, it drops back to the 2G or 3G network that's available to complete the call. And in that deregistering from 4G and re-registering on a 2G or 3G network, we think that this is the reason why the limited service state call volume is quite high at the moment. But as we migrate to 4G and 2G and 3G is turned off, this problem should sort itself out, we hope. Another point that I haven't put here, and it's worth mentioning, and indeed Benoit alluded to it in his slides, and that's where if you don't have all of the emergency services using AML, or if it's not implemented for both well, the main handset OS providers of Android and iOS, and Huawei have their own now, and that'll start to pick up. But if you don't have support for every handset, obviously it's going to have an impact on the success rate. And then there are some other issues. You may remember we did a webinar with Google on AML error rates a while back. These are issues where the handset triggers the AML, and Google can see the statistics on this, but the network doesn't deliver it. And this is usually to do with some kind of configuration issues in the mobile networks. And Google and indeed Apple are willing to work with the networks and the emergency services in the countries to improve that. So if you do have an issue with AML error rates, then please let us know about it, and we'll certainly engage with Google and Apple as well and try and put heads together and resolve those issues. Just to give an example of this, there was a country outside of Europe we heard of recently that had quite high AML error rates, and it turned out that the mobile network configuration was such that when you were making a voice call to 112, SMSs couldn't be sent. The idea being to, I suppose, save resource on the handset, battery power to continue to have the emergency call. But once that was reconfigured, the AML error rate dropped dramatically. So this is something that should be considered where AML error rates are high as well. In terms of accuracy, we had reported in the findings of the survey, it ranges from 3 meters to 348 meters, which, if you consider 10 years ago, we were relying solely on network location, which in some cases was providing accuracy of a number of kilometers, which isn't very useful. So this is really good. In terms of the lower accuracy figures, so towards the 348 meters, there is the environmental factors that need to be considered here too. The call could have been made indoor. Perhaps satellite wasn't available and relied on Wi-Fi and the mobile network, or vice versa. It was in an area where it maybe had satellite, but no access to the other methods of location, which are used to populate the algorithm to calculate the location with confidence. Next slide, please, Benoit. So then, and I think this was really telling from our perspective in terms of informing our work on the location criteria recommendations. So 81 to 94% of locations had an accuracy estimate of under 100 meters, 69 to 85 under 50 meters, and 36 to 79% under 30 meters. So you can see that, if you're able to, have, if the AML is working well, that, you are getting extremely good horizontal accuracy with it. And in particular, the having as high as 85% under 50 meters is really promising and encouraging figure to have. Then in terms of how quickly the AML information is delivered to the PSAP, and this was considered, I know when AML discussions had started, this was considered as one of the drawbacks of it, that it didn't come with the call, it came afterwards. But when you look at the figures here, 79 to 100% under 60 seconds, and 12 to 98% under 15 seconds. So the speed at which AML is provided is high enough that it wouldn't have a significant impact, at least on being able to locate the caller quickly. Obviously, you can't use the location for routing the call, because you really have to have that at call setup, which isn't possible. But I think that the speeds we're seeing here are really encouraging, and it shows that from that perspective, AML is very effective. And next slide, please, Benoit. And so that brings me to the recommendation. So Benoit mentioned the legislation in one of the opening slides. And Article 109 places an obligation on member states after consultation with BEREC, if they consider that necessary, to implement accuracy and reliability criteria. That's supplemented by the Delegated Regulation 2023/444, which requires member states to adopt the criteria and to report to the Commission on the criteria by the 5th of March 2024. So that's less than a year away now. So member states will already be thinking about what their criteria will be. And in order to inform those discussions, we are going to publish a recommendation limited to mobile originated location in September. And we hope that it will encourage and promote coordination across Europe, because you must remember that implementing these criteria is a member state competence. So there's the possibility that, you know, the 27 member states could all implement different criteria. And of course, that would fragment the regulatory framework and make it difficult for handset providers, also even for end users whose safety would be better protected in one country compared to another, if the criteria were quite lax. So what we tried to do is we gathered statistics in the report card, and we analyzed those. We looked at best practices in other countries. At the moment, our draft recommendation is that all mobile originated emergency communications should have a horizontal accuracy estimate of 50 meters for 80% of the cost. Sorry, 80% of mobile originated emergency communications should have 50 meters or less in terms of accuracy. So that's our draft recommendation. When we publish the document, you'll see the thinking behind it and why we arrived at it. We think it's feasible. And I think when you look at some of the statistics we talked about today, it certainly is feasible. It requires some work to fully realize the benefits of AML, and to use that as a complement to network-based location. And indeed, network-based location, as we already mentioned, is mandatory requirement. And there may be some parts of the country where you need something more than AML. So a better network-based solution, for example. But we will present the findings of our recommendation at our event in Brussels on the 19th and 20th of September. So keep an eye out for that, and we hope you can make the event. And I think that's it from my side, Benoit.
Thank you very much, Freddie. That was great. First of all, I have to apologize because a bit earlier in the webinar, I said that the criteria expected for March 2023, it's of course March 2024, as correctly written on this very slide. So sorry for my own confusion. So thank you, Freddie, for giving us some insight about the different reported success rates and also the work that EENA is doing. So stay tuned for the publication in September and the events in September, where we'll be covering that topic a bit more in depth. I see that there's a few questions asked on the Q&A box. I'll quickly finish the presentation. There's only a few slides remaining, and then we can take on board the questions. So yeah, just basically as you presented, Freddie, there's a lot to do, and actually you were mentioning these error rates that are linked to many different issues. I think that's why it's important to keep monitoring actually the results and the performance of AML, and that's the subject of my next slide, which is about reporting the results and these statistics on AML, and we saw that many countries are actually compiling these results, checking them sometimes manually, sometimes automatically, and these are shared sometimes automatically with the MNOs. It can be on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, on a yearly basis, but it's important to have a look at the performance, also the performance per mobile network operator, so that they can change some settings to basically allow the transmission of AML. So it's quite important to have a look at this. You can also find the more details about just what is behind the colors in the map on the AML report cards. We ask a few more questions related to reporting. And actually on that topic, we also had a technical workshop held last summer, if I remember correctly. It was in July 2022, and it was on identifying and resolving AML errors when using Android DLS. It was actually 2 years ago. And so you can listen to the recording on the link provided in these slides. It's also on the EENA website. Just to conclude, we went through a lot of things, but to summarize, so AML is now widely used in most European countries. I think that's a good achievement, and it saves lives. That's really good. Actually, just to tell you, when we did this AML report card, one of the questions that we asked to all the countries is to provide some success stories, basically where AML was helpful to save lives. And actually, what we got from most countries is that it's no longer possible to get success stories from the call takers, because now it's so much, integrated in the daily operations that you don't really imagine the situation where AML is not there, or that's or does not contribute to it. That now you don't really have like a lot of stories anymore that are shared, because people just get used to it, which is really great, but it still saves lives on a daily basis. However, there's still some work to do on some improvements. So for next time we make an update, I want all the countries that were in gray on this map to turn, was it in orange, I think, in the opening slides, or like to be colored on the availability map, and also that it's available for all the emergency services in these countries. As Freddie just presented, we have to work on improving the success rates. There's still a lot of errors to be fixed, and I think it's quite an important work to do. Also, to share the best practices and to share the different experiences around that is quite important. And on roaming, there's a lot of things to work on to make it possible to improve basically the transmission of AML for people roaming in a different country. Finally, we also need to keep a look at future evolution and basically to use AML for the things. One is to provide additional data. It is getting possible with HTTPS, as I just said. So that's something we may see in the future with AML. And also there's some work to do on integrating AML in next generation 112, which is to summarize in one sentence the transition to IP of emergency communications, if I can say. But as Christina said, it's also detailed in dedicated ETSI documents. So please have a look at that for more details. And just to conclude, you can find all the info you need on AML on eena.org/AML. It's quite easy to access. There you'll find many documents, many webinars. And one of the documents is the 2023 AML report card, which we just presented. And when you see these slides, you can just click on the link and you'll see the document directly, which brings us to the end of the presentation. Thanks a lot for your attention. That's how you must imagine Christina, Freddie, and myself at the moment. And so, we still have around 15 minutes for questions, so feel free to ask them. I saw a few questions, so I'm just gonna read them. I'll just stop sharing and reactivating my camera, and I invite perhaps Freddie and Christina to do the same. So first of all, one question from Jan Obanek from Czech Republic. So how can we start receiving Harmony OS AML in our country? So that's Harmony is Huawei. I think the best approach is to contact Huawei directly in your country. There should be Huawei contacts in your country, and the best is to approach them nationally, because there's no such globally established contact as it's the case for Google and Apple. Then I saw a few other questions or remarks actually from Adam Bayumi. So I think AML should be mandatory to work for 112 and 911. So it is mandatory to work for 112. Of course, there's no European legislation linked to 911, which is why it's not mandatory. But in most countries now, it's activated. Will AML roaming be ever enabled on iOS? That's the question we get. I think any presentation and webinar. I wish I could say yes. I don't know, to be honest. It is indeed a big frustration shared by all emergency services, is that they would like to see AML roaming on Apple smartphones. And I do hope it will be available in the future, but there's really nothing I can tell you at the moment. The next question was, why does not everyone use timing advance? It should be mandatory. So here for everyone, timing advance is improvements on the network-based location. There's also, Freddie, you covered the round trip time as well. So there are some discussions, and actually there are some references to improvements on the network-based location in the delegated regulation 2023-444, which you just mentioned, Freddie, and basically the criteria that the member states have to adapt should also integrate, include better network-based location. It should basically, the way it's phrased in the legislation is that it should allow the emergency services to usefully come to the end user's assistance. So that is something to follow. Some networks support 112 over IMS Voltaire. Orange France does, and while Rome on Team Italy. So yeah, that was a comment. That was not a question.
Yeah, I think Benoit, that
yeah.
comment was in relation to the point I made about circuit switch fallback, which was widely implemented in Europe, and it's only quite recently that we're starting to say, within the last 18 months, that we're starting to see, in particular, mobile operators offering, VoLTE services to 112. But previously, it was always circuit switch fallback in Europe. So yes, it is good to see that move has taken place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and still on the networks. So Adam also says that on Bouygues Telecom, the network refused the SMS while in call. I think that is a problem that has already happened in the past in a few countries. I remember Iceland was this way. There should be some changes in the settings of the network to make this possible. Of course, it was done at a time where it was not needed, but now when there is AML, it's important to work. But thanks for reporting that to us, which is why I think it's really important to monitor the performance of AML and break this down per mobile operator, because we can see really different error rates per mobile network operator. And finally, one other thing. So Adam just rectified, or added something to a question I read, is that I meant some US citizens, for example, will dial 911 instead of 112 when they come to Europe, and they must have AML too. I absolutely agree with you. I think we saw with some countries that 911 can be configured as an emergency number that will trigger AML in Europe. So it should be done in as many countries as possible, even though it's not mandatory. It should be done, in my opinion. So I agree with you. And finally, there was a question, which perhaps Freddie or Christina, you can help to respond, which is that, so I'm translating because it's in French. So there are some issues with some mobile network operators, Orange, that don't allow SMS on the multi-SIM handsets, or when there's like multi-SIMs. I think it's indeed quite an issue, because there's the phone will not know, where the SMS on the phone can be done from different SIMs. And that is quite an issue. Do you know the status of where this is, Freddie or Christina?
No, I thought when I actually Google translated that message, I thought it was in relation to a SIM provided by an operator that offered an internet access service, so a data only. And I was going to ask the Adam, who posted the question, if you can actually make a voice call using a SIM that's for data only, because you need the voice call to activate the AML. And it's possible that you could still dial 112, but you'd be in limited service, and then you wouldn't have either an SMS service to send the AML or a data service to send a HTTPS message. So I think that there's a few things around that need to be looked at. On multi-SIM, I don't know why it wouldn't work. It should. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't. As long as you're able to, whatever SIM it is, that it's enabled for a voice call that will allow the AML to be activated.
One thing that can happen on multi-SIM, and I agree, Freddie, with you that it shouldn't be a problem to send the AML, is that the voice is launched by so that the number that appears in the PSAP is not the same as the one sending the SMS. But it's not the fact of not being able to send it, but the fact that the PSAP is not receiving it correctly. But I don't know if this is the question.
Thank you. I guess we'll follow that online. It will be easier than through the questions. We're also approaching the end of our webinar. So if there's no question, just thank you for participating in the webinar. So it has been recorded, so you can always it will be shared on EENA website. So as all our webinars, it's on eena.org/webinars, quite easy to find, also on our YouTube channel. The slides will also be shared. For any information about AML, the link is eena.org/AML, and we are reachable by email as well. So you can write to any of us. Our email address were in the slides, so feel free to reach out for any follow-up question. And thank you very much, and talk to you soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.